Let's start this meeting in silence for 15 minutes and go inside ourselves just to be with whatever is. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. So firstly, what's been exciting for me is that people are starting to ask questions to contribute already into the conversations. And I'd love to kick off with one that I found quite powerful. So one of my students currently has a tricky situation, and her husband's son has autism, and they're involved in a really brutal custody battle with his ex, and it's very much taking it out of them. And they received what she found to be unusual advice from their lawyer, which is, we're involved in the process now and you have to completely surrender. And she finds this concept of surrender whilst in the midst of a battleground challenging. And so her question is directly around right action and surrender. And so if one intellectually understands and is slowly embodying the greater understanding of consciousness and free will, how do you decipher when to let go, when to take action, and maybe even fight for what you believe is right?
It's a great question, and thank you for bringing that. I'm going to re-quote again that beautiful phrase from Susan Siegel from her book, Collision with the Infinite. When someone asked her how she lived her life, she said, "I simply do the next most obvious thing to do." When the understanding happened, when self-realization happened, not really very much changes on the surface with that simple way of living your life. It's, if you look at anyone's life, if you look at your life, you'll see that that's all you've ever really been doing. And the understanding doesn't necessarily change the flow of that, but what it will do is relieve you from being caught up in the issues that are essentially linked with this idea of separation. Now, you brought a very critical situation, full of emotion, full of stress, full of difficulty for this student of yours, and whenever those are the life circumstances you're dealing with, if you are trying to find your way to incorporate elements of this understanding into your daily life, it's obviously wise to proceed carefully and consciously when the circumstances are so difficult on the outside. So, as I said, I think last week, one way of easing yourself into the trust and the let go that are essentially the ingredients to live your life non-volitionally is to experiment with a context that isn't so critical. If you jump in the deep end of a pool and you don't know how to swim, you're going to be in difficulty. And this is a transitory phase. It's a phase that you can, even with the idea of doership, still bring into your life and play with it and see where it takes you. And the more consciously you do that, the more consciously you experiment with that, the more the likelihood is that this trust, this necessary trust, will be reflected back from a particular so-called decision or choice you made, and you will begin to actually see and feel and experience for yourself, without having to rely on anyone else, the benefits of an increased relaxation around your doership. The truth of the matter is, the idea of personal doership is false. It is something that we've been conditioned to believe since we were very small. And it is the cause of the suffering that we experience as we live our lives, because we keep taking possession of these actions that happen through our individual body minds as if they are your own. And they are not. They are actions that had to happen because of something much bigger than you. No matter how much your ego may scream against such a perception, it is the basic truth, and it is possible for an individual who's interested and whose destiny brings them to these kind of inquiries. It is possible for an individual to experiment with that and to see the truth of it in their daily life. But if you jump into experimenting with this perception just to see whether it works, without the understanding that underpins it, that has to be there as a foundational aspect of it, you're going to probably come up with trouble, and worse than that, you will destroy the trust before you get a chance to open yourself to a different way of being alive. So it's very important to always remember, this is not some self-help technique. This is not something that you can pull off your bookshelf and suddenly put into practice. You can play with it in that way from an intellectual point of view, but the way it becomes a truth in your perception of the living of your life is through you becoming convinced through your own experience that this is actually the case. So it's important to realize that the actual landing of that on a deep level inside of you, a level that no longer requires you to remain vigilant or constantly thinking about it, will have to be based on an understanding. And that understanding is essentially, you are not the doer. That is the basis of this let go. If you continue to think you're the doer, then you will still be caught in that cycle of doership, and you will have to suffer the consequences of that belief. And that belief is the cause of all human suffering. So the most important way to come into this is not to try and find a clever and useful way to make a particular set of circumstance easier for you. Although, as I say, you can experiment with circumstance in a playful way, but it would be unwise to do that experimentation in such a critical situation as your friend has before her at the moment. The only way that this can land and stay landed in your actual experience of your life is for you to understand fundamentally and deeply inside yourself that you are not the doer, that you have never been the doer, that your body-mind is a vehicle through which actions that have to happen, happen. And that's true for everything and everyone else in this manifestation. So then you come to, okay, that sounds interesting. How can I find this out for myself? How can I actually ground this understanding inside myself? And there are two resources that I could refer people to. One is a small little book by Sam Harris called Free Will. And it's well worth the read. He takes more of a neurological perspective on proving that science has now come up with essentially proof that free will is not actual, it's not actually true. But if you want a more spiritual approach to it, then my last teacher, Ramesh Balsekar, his concept will really allow you to go deeper into that. And he has many books, but one of them I particularly like is All There Is Consciousness. So if you're interested, you can do your own research with those two resources. But if you don't want to do that, then here is what you can do in your own spare time to come to a conclusion inside yourself that is irrefutable, that actually this idea of me having individual separate doership is not true. So at the end of any day, when you have a quiet moment, just sit down quietly somewhere, simply, you can have a cup of tea nearby, and take one action from your day that you are completely and utterly convinced you did, that you have no doubt in your mind that you were responsible for that action. You would bet your whole bank balance that you did that action. And then simply inquire into it. Go back, trace back the events that took place before that action happened through your body-mind, and see and ascertain whether you actually had control over the events that led up to that action. I give you an example. You end up in a restaurant eating a meal. So I chose this restaurant. But then go back. How did this restaurant come into your consciousness? Maybe you were walking down the street and you smelt a nice smell that was emanating from the restaurant. You were not responsible for that smell. That happened. Or maybe you're at that restaurant because you Googled it. And maybe you Googled it because a friend of yours said, well, why don't you Google it? Etc., etc. If you go back behind any action, if you go back far enough and sincerely enough, it's no point in doing this inquiry if all your intention is to try and prove it wrong. Then you're simply not ready to be able to take on board what is a very challenging understanding that this body-mind that you thought you were in control of is suddenly actually something that's much more loose and flexible, that is much more translucent and transparent than you ever believed it was. And that, of course, that perception, that understanding can be scary to begin with. But the beauty of it, if you can see it, if every action you inquire into and you go back and find its source and you understand that you had no control of that original source that prompted those chain of events, then you can, and you may need to do it a few times before you're absolutely convinced. But if you can come to that perception that is your perception based on your experience. You're not listening to me or anyone else telling you what is and what isn't the case. You have discovered that for yourself, and that discovery will always be yours. And it is only when you make a discovery, you make an exploration based on your own experience that it has any chance of really lasting as something effective in terms of changing the way you live your life. So if you feel like doing that inquiry, that is one simple way that anyone can look at this idea of personal doership and start to actually examine how true it is according to their own experience. So again, just to summarize in this particular example that you've brought up, it's really not possible to say what a right action is, because it will be totally dependent on the context that action is actually addressed towards. All that can be done is to go to the root of action itself, of personal doership itself, and understand for yourself that that is a false belief, a false concept. Once you see that, then a great freedom can start to land inside of you. It'll still be shaky to begin with because it's completely new territory for you. But if you have really seen the truth of your own investigation, and then you put that truth into practice in your life, you actually, before you make some decision or choice, you go, no, hang on a second, I'm not sure that I actually really want to do this. Am I simply doing the next most obvious thing to do? Am I leaving enough space to be able to really see what the most easy, obvious way for me to proceed is this understanding will help that land practically inside your daily life. So then right action will depend on the context of whatever it is you're involved in. But then you're not locked into a particular routine of a past habitual response system. You're not trapped by something that was established over time because of past experience. You find yourself alive and open to the present moment, and then allowing your body-mind to respond in a freer way than it's ever been able to do before, because it's no longer relying on the control and the fear behind the control of repeating something that's always worked for you before, but is suddenly freer and more loose and more open and more intelligent and more aware to be able to actually see what is the case, what is the context in front of you, and then to let your body-mind respond with an added intelligence that is no longer burdened by the past, that's no longer simply in another case of repetitive response or reactivity to a particular set of circumstance.
Two things off that, and we can see which one we would like to explore. I feel where, in particular, but probably a lot of people get stuck, is on the idea of right action. And I know they're a big part of the teachings in Buddhism that, there's the right action, because then the impetus is on, well, don't make the wrong action, don't make the wrong decision. So I think there's something to be said there about our ego then weighing in. It's not actually a spontaneous movement through the world. It's like, it's got to be the right one, not the next one. And there can be a real sense of collapse. And I remember years ago you said to me out of the blue, you were like, it's okay to make a mistake. And that sentence was so stunning to my system that I remember just going into like a freeze response of just that there was so much fight in me to not make a mistake. And it dissolved in that moment, the idea that you got to get it right, you can't make a mistake. But particularly around love, the spirit, connection to the divine, I also was wading into that as well. So that's one piece I think we could explore. And the second piece is, and there's a quote on your wall that I'm going to find. No, I can't find it. Oh, it'll come to me. But it's essentially around this idea of, I think it's a Zen piece, but like everything's already done, nothing needs to be done, and so, just live your life, which sounds as a big overarching piece, so I will surrender to that. I think the fear then is around, well, what does get done, and what are we surrendering to? One of my students asked me that the other day. She's like, surrendering to what? Everyone keeps talking about surrender, let go, surrender. And she said, to what exactly?
Yeah, you referred to my wall, and for those who aren't familiar with where I live, my wall is decorated with lots of beautiful quotes. And one of my favorite ones is from a man called Robert Adams. He was an American man who, at a very young age, met Ramana Maharshi, and he went on to become a teacher in his own right. And the quote reads like this: "All is well, and everything is unfolding as it should. There are no mistakes. None have ever been made, none are being made, and none will ever be made." And that, very simply, is the bottom line truth. There's absolutely no need to be afraid of mistakes, because they simply don't happen. They are simply classified as a mistake because of a restriction in the way you see. The space of understanding allows you to accept the flow of events as it comes at you. And of course, included in that flow is your response to that flow of events. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, there is no right action because that implies a wrong action. There is only ever just action. And that action is never a mistake. The mistake is simply a misperception around the flow of what had to happen. Now, that may bring up feelings of defeatism in some people, that it's too fatalistic for my taste, that I want to be able to affect life and be participating in life, and if I go along with what you're suggesting, then I lose all my energy. And these responses are some of the common responses that happen when people are first confronted with the challenging realization that actually they don't have any personal doership. But if you stay with it, if you allow that to settle inside yourself, what then will start to become more and more obvious is an incredible sense of expansion and freedom that this perception allows you. You are no longer tortured by the so-called consequences of your action. I did something and I hurt someone and now I feel guilty, or I feel ashamed, or I achieved something and I was incredibly successful and I now feel pride and I feel arrogance. These are all the ingredients of human suffering. With this perception, with this understanding, when it lands inside of you that you are not in control, that this vehicle, this body-mind that you're identified with, is simply a channel for events to happen, just like everyone else is a channel, then there is a tremendous sense of relaxation and let go, as you're no longer holding yourself personally responsible for the things that take place through your body-mind. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if some action that happens through you ends up hurting someone who you love, you will feel regret. You will not have wanted or intended for that to take place. And when you see the effect of the action that's taken place through you, you'll feel regret that it happened, and you may very well express that regret. But you will never again make the mistake of thinking that you did that action. In that mistake comes the guilt, comes the shame. And in this understanding, you are set free from that. Now, the two common objections people have is, okay, so if I'm not the doer, if I'm not responsible for my actions, what's to stop me going down to my local Walmart in the United States, say, and purchasing an AK-47 and killing 20 people? And the simple answer to that intellectual question is your conditioning will almost certainly prevent you doing that. It doesn't mean to say that there aren't serial killers in this manifestation, but in terms of that being a relevant problem for you, it's unlikely that it's going to be. And then the other end of the scale is, okay, so if I don't do anything, what's to stop me in staying in bed all day and just becoming a lazy bum? And then the answer to that is, well, have you ever tried it? Have you ever tried staying in bed all day? At a certain point, your life energy will pull you up from that bed and you will find yourself back engaged with life. So to come back to the question, this idea of right action, there are no mistakes. So if you can set yourself free from constantly trying to perform according to this idea that you are responsible, that you are in control, if you can step back from that prison of so-called personal responsibility and allow yourself to engage in your life in a more easy, more relaxed, more aware way than you've ever done before. This so-called control, on the surface, it looks like you've got everything together, but actually it comes at the cost of your energy and your awareness. It's that all of the effort and energy that goes into making sure that you don't do anything wrong is taking away from your ability to be aware and to really enjoy being alive. So I don't know if that answers your... Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to interject because I had a particularly challenging time with this in one very specific situation where a meditation and spiritual teacher I knew was sexually abusing his students, and his comeback to the whole thing was, well, there are no mistakes made and it's all just consciousness at play, which is one big giant spiritual bypass and lack of accountability. So obviously my conclusion there is I don't think the full understanding had landed in this person and they were abusing their power, but I feel in myself when we're talking about this, those kinds of examples coming up of when people do take a concept or a truth and then use it as a manipulation tool. And I think, you know, you and I have moved through enough spiritual communities and I'm sure we've seen that happen. Can you just talk to that for a little bit, just to settle my heart, but also probably the minds of people listening?
Yeah, again, whatever happens has to happen. And we live in duality. This manifestation contains everything. So nothing can insulate us from the way this place is set up, which is based on interconnected opposites. So if we want love in our lives, we necessarily have to accept the possibility of hate. If we want light in our lives, we have to accept the possibility of dark. And in fact, it's only the play of those opposites that allows us to see. It's only the contrast of those opposites that allows us to experience. If everything was white, we would never know white. It's only through black that we are actually able to perceive white. It's only through hate that we really know what love is. Now, I am not in any way suggesting that you should therefore go out and start hating everyone so you can really understand love. You don't need to interfere in that way. Life will bring you what it has to. Your place in it is the one who sees. Your essential truth is that which sees it all happening in this body-mind, through this body-mind that you're identified with. And the more that you understand that perception, you understand that as being the essence of your fundamental reality, then the more allowing, the more space your particular vehicle will have for the events that need to flow through it, to flow freely and spontaneously and in a much more mysterious and useful way for you and anyone around you. And basically the fear is always coming from the conditioning. What if I do something wrong? What if I get hurt? What if you know, my teacher abuses his power? These things happen. This is not a justification of those things, and each individual will go through the consequences of either misusing a concept in order to justify a certain set of behaviors that he or she probably knows is not right. He will have to go through the consequences of those actions. But it's not about giving a carte blanche to evil, a carte blanche to all the bad guys in life. It's about freeing your perception so that you, at the moment, the perception is based around fear. You're afraid of what you might do wrong and what everyone else might do wrong to you. How is there any room for love when there's so much fear around the perception? you can see that the space for love is only going to be intermittent. It's never going to be grounded. It's never going to be fully felt and experienced and understood in the context of so much fear. So all you can do to help loosen that restriction in your perception is to do the inquiries that I suggested earlier in this talk, to see whether what I'm suggesting might have a basis of truth within your own experience, because it is only there that this can get settled. You cannot settle this on an intellectual level. You will never do it. You can only settle it by your experience. And then your experience, your space, your understanding will begin to be felt by anyone who you come into contact with. And that in itself will bring the change and the support for other people to start loosening the restrictions that bind them in the way they're living their lives. But it all comes down to understanding. And that understanding has to be grounded in your experience. That is the only validity. Everything else will just be belief, just be something that isn't actually settled inside of you. So experiment. Experiment with your life. Experiment with these things. And just, as I said many times now, do it intelligently. Don't bite off a huge chunk of the pie right away. You'll get indigestion. Just go at a simple, playful pace with whatever is resonant with you in the things that I've suggested, and see what happens.
You don't deliberately give the ego an opportunity to say, I told you so. Yeah. I think also, and this is probably more of a comment than a question, I was always so confused by, well, why do we do this in the first place? And then this idea of like personal doership, we're so attached to it. And the more I explored it, the more it became evident that one of the delights is the freedom emotionally around the anguish of getting it wrong. But also then you don't also get to take credit for all the things that go well. And it became really obvious, of course, our egos are attached to this because that's the reward, right? If I have to take personal credit for everything that goes terribly or I've done wrong and experience all the pain and anguish, but I also then I get to be very proud and very like I owned that, I nailed that, I did that so well. But when there's no me, then you lose that.
You don't. You lose the arrogance in the example you gave. You lose the arrogance, but you don't lose the pleasure.
You don't lose the joy.
You'll still have the pleasure and joy of seeing something beautiful that you were honoured and lucky enough to have happen through your body-mind. And you'll still feel the regret rather than the guilt or shame when something through your body-mind hurts someone else. So it's not that you lose all feeling. In fact, the feeling increases. It becomes truer. It becomes more real. Basically, what I'm suggesting through my experience is really the only way to be in a body-mind and to fully enjoy this opportunity of being human. And the thing is that as I said, we need both. We need black and white. It's just how it is here. There's no point in railing against that. And quite frankly, my teacher used to say, would you go and see a movie that was only about the good guys? There's another quote on my wall, which I'll read to you here. This is from Nisargadatta Maharaj. Our life is now, and the love of it is now. We love variety, the play of pain and pleasure. We're fascinated by contrast. For this, we need the opposites and their apparent separation. We enjoy them for a time and then get tired and crave for the peace and silence of pure being. The cosmic heart beats ceaselessly. I am the witness and the heart too. That's it. That is what we go through here. This place is for learning. And so the mechanism of an ego being created and going through all that it goes through in each individual's life is necessary for this play of consciousness, for this manifestation, to provide all it can in terms of a vast field of experiencing and a vast field of learning. And in a limited amount of cases, that learning will be a spiritual learning that sometimes will lead to the ultimate freedom, the ultimate understanding, self-realization.
I think also, I really like that you're highlighting that the emotion, the felt sense of being alive increases, because often that idea of equanimity and that embodiment of like, wow, it's all happening, nothing's phasing me, and there's not an enlivening there, and there's a repression, essentially. Like, I've got to repress feelings and emotions so that I can find this, like, midpoint. The actual opposite is true, which I think is so beautiful to recognize.
Yeah, and it's a maturity, you know. The thing is that there is a certain crude pleasure that we've all enjoyed in the rough and ready of the emotional roller coaster. But what takes place when those extremes are understood to be not actually fundamentally real, then a refinement of your experiencing takes place. And that isn't, maybe it won't come with so many bangs and whistles, but by this time, as Maharaj's quote says, you'll have enjoyed them for a time, but then got tired and craved for the peace and silence of pure being. But what it does come with is a depth and a breadth and a refinement, a deepening of what it means to be alive. This incredible gift of being here in this magical realm of consciousness, and being able to be there and see it take place and understand the basis on which it takes place, and still to be having yourself located in an individual body-mind for as long as you're still alive, and being able to have that grandstand seat of what it's like to be at the zenith of the human possibility.
Can we circle back on the idea, based just off that, what are we surrendering to then? So as my student asked in the beginning, this idea, her lawyer, for example, told her to surrender. What do you feel we're surrendering to? Aside from obviously everything you've just described.
I can only, I think, probably repeat it. There are many different ways of conceptualizing this, but essentially the first answer I would give to anyone is you're surrendering yourself to the flow. You're surrendering yourself to God. You're surrendering yourself to consciousness. Now that all sounds very fine, and I can imagine many minds going, yeah, and what does that actually mean? Well, in its essence, it isn't any more complicated than the quote from Susan Siegel. It means simply doing the next most obvious thing to do. But at the moment, when you follow that, there is so much friction within the so-called decision-making process because of this idea that you are responsible, that you're the one in control, that it's impossible for you to really let go into that. So an understanding simply creates the space for you to come back to a spontaneity where the question, who am I surrendering to, will be meaningless. It won't come up. It'll simply be the next most obvious thing to do. And I'm afraid I can't explain it any better than that. You have to find that space for yourself if it's your interest, if you have become tired and crave the peace and silence of pure being, if you find yourself in a place where the pain in your life is forcing you to look at these things, and it may be your destiny to continue to explore in this area of life, then this may prove to be helpful and useful.
Beautiful. Can I read another question?
Sure.
So, I'm going to read it directly. When I look back at my life, there's so much I've let go of, and so little that I hold on to as an identity in the world in terms of what I'm doing and how I'm showing up in the world. In my meditation practice, and when listening to you, Mutribo, and other teachers, it feels so right to be in a place of dissolving and disappearing as a separate self. Yet, in relationship to others, and as a person with a role in the world, I sometimes feel very shaky and unsure of who I am. Can you speak to this, please?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and I happen to know that it comes from a dear friend, Raja, who lives in the States, and it's very appropriate that she's the first one to bring a question to our conversation, because it was very much her inspiration that these talks are now happening, and I'm glad that she's written this. And it's a very poignant question on this journey of seeking, of spiritual seeking, because it is a journey of let go and trust that inevitably leads towards emptiness and disappearance. And that is a very delicate journey to make inside oneself. And the more that you find yourself letting go into that space of emptiness inside yourself, that space of trust inside yourself, the more strange it can be to deal with the outside world. And it's one of the reasons that for so many thousands of years, people on spiritual searches often took themselves away from the world and sequestered themselves in a cave or in a monastery. And there's no need for that. You don't have to do that. But if your journey is taking place within an active context of everyday life, of dealing with the world, then it's going to be probable that as you move deeper into yourself, the roles that you've assumed in your daily life become more and more strange for you to occupy. And it will be a period of transition that may have certain moments of difficulty in it. But then I think it's important to understand what that difficulty is. Like Raj says, she feels shaky sometimes in the roles that she performs with the outside world. So what is that shakiness? Where is that shakiness located? What is the foundation of that shakiness? And the way I would see it is the foundation of that shakiness is whatever the remnants of doership still remain, whatever the habitual ideas of separation still there, that still nudge at you and question you whether you're being enough, whether you're being as capable or as efficient or as charming or as delightful as you should be in whatever the role it is that you find yourself playing. And what I would recommend is just to remember always, you are that which sees. You are not that shakiness. That shakiness is taking place through the individual body-mind that you happen to have an identification with. Watch it, look at it, love it, become friends with it. Don't try and hide it. Be there with your shakiness in those roles. Don't be embarrassed about the shakiness. It's your sensitivity. It's your delicacy trying to find its rightful expression in a world that isn't necessarily set up to receive it. There's bound to be a period of adjustment as you learn how to navigate in this new space of freedom that is settling inside you. But I think it's important to understand that the shakiness is simply the remnants of identity still coming in and going, are you doing it right? Are you sure you've got this right? That eternal questioning that we all have lived with over the years of our lives. And that's okay. It takes time. It takes a little time and delicacy to transit from such an entrenched conditioning that has been built up over years into a new space of freedom. But what I would suggest as easily and as delicately as you can for yourself, Raj, is just to be there with it. Don't try and hide it. Let yourself be that shakiness. Let yourself find a way to allow others to see that as it's happening in you. It won't be that way forever. It won't necessarily even be that way in the next moment. But what will make it more likely to change and to not be that way in the next moment is whatever presence and awareness and transparency you can bring to the situation. And of course it will be context dependent. It depends on where and what the situation is. I'm never suggesting to do something completely stupid in terms of your behavior with the outside world. You are an intelligent person that can see what is appropriate. But within that, it's possible still to expand the way you can occupy that space. And the way you occupy that space can become more and more closely aligned to what it is you have been meeting inside yourself in the privacy of your own inquiry, of your own search, of your own meditation. So it's beautiful to feel shaky. There's absolutely nothing wrong in it. It's as it should be. It's completely natural. It shows your love. It shows your sensitivity. It shows the change that you're involved with. So don't worry about it. Just love yourself even more in that space. Accept yourself even more in that delicacy. And as much as you can share it and allow it to shine in all its shakiness on the surface of you, if you can allow that to be there, then it will move naturally into the next space. And it'll be a seamless and beautiful extra expression that may touch people in a way that you haven't been able to do before. It may be that others, in perceiving your shakiness, have an emotional opening towards you, an availability towards you that they've never felt before, because they've always seen you as this together and smart and intelligent and proper woman. It's just an opportunity for you and for whoever you share it with. But it's beautiful because it's these subtleties that actually show how you are moving inside yourself on this unique journey. These are the signposts that indicate you are directed back towards your home. It's these natural and inevitable transitions that show you are moving in the right direction. And as long as you can see that it's just an old idea that wants to pull it back into what you think the world will term as acceptable behavior, as long as you can see it's just that old habitual response inside your body-mind, and not give it attention, but rather meet it and let it be there. Let it be who you are in that moment. Because that's all a spiritual journey is, being whoever you are in this moment with whatever is.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Jack. That was lovely. Thank you to all the people who provided those beautiful questions too. And as always, we'll just finish with another 15 minutes in silence, just to integrate and come back to ourselves and allow whatever is happening inside of us to be there.